thank you, Elbert. My good friend Elbert, if you've never been with Elbert to Fredonia, to the Coon Dog Inn to eat lunch, you're really missing out. So I appreciate Elbert's leadership. It's great to see so many friends here at the CACO conference. You know, when you think about what makes Kentucky tick, it's the local elected officials. It's all the people that hold office in the courthouses and all 120 counties across the beautiful Commonwealth. And I know that you all have a lot of challenges. You're always trying to make ends meet. The national economy is doing great, and a lot of the communities in Kentucky are doing well, but it's still a struggle in rural Kentucky. When your population's not growing, it's hard to make ends meet. When your bills go up every year, and healthcare costs go up every year, and pension obligation costs go up every year, but you all do a tremendous job managing the counties in Kentucky, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate the leadership in this room. Before I give my Washington update, I want you to know that my office is available anytime that there's anything that we can do to be of any assistance to anyone, not just the great 35 counties in the 1st Congressional District, but all across Kentucky. I know that from back in my days as Commissioner of Agriculture, I look around this room and I see a lot of friends, a lot of people that we work together on a lot of agriculture initiatives, and I just want you to know I'll never forget you, and I appreciate your support and friendship over the years and look forward to working with you in the future. But I was asked today to give an update on what's going on in Washington, and I don't know where to begin. There's never a dull moment in Washington, D.C. Elbert mentioned support of the president. And I just did an interview with Spectrum News back there, and of course they asked about the impeachment proceedings and the Republicans that stormed the room. I wasn't one of the Republicans that stormed the room because I'm on the Oversight Committee, and we can be in the room on just about every deposition that's taken place. And I said this in the interview, and I'll say this today. I've read those depositions. I read the Mueller report. What's being reported isn't 100% accurate because it's in a closed-door room, and the reporters that are reporting on what's going on in the closed-door room are getting their one and only source are from partisan politicians who really want to hear things that aren't being spoken. And I think that today, as I stand before you, there's nothing that Donald Trump has done that is anywhere near what I would consider an impeachable offense. So I just wanted to mention that because that's the number one topic that people ask about is the president going to be impeached? And you know, I'm fortunate that one of the committees I'm on, there are 3 main committees that are looking into all of the impeachable offenses, and it's the 2 main committees are the Intelligence Committee, well, the 3 main committees, Intelligence Committee, Judiciary Committee, and then the Oversight Committee. The Oversight Committee, of course, is the committee that 2 years ago when I got elected, Jason Chaffetz was the chairman, and now he's a Fox News analyst. He resigned, Trey Gowdy became the chairman, and he decided not to run for re-election, and up until last week, Elijah Cummings was the chairman when the Democrats took the majority of the U.S. House, and he passed away. So I don't know who Pelosi's going to fill to be the next chairman. I'm sure it'll be a dandy, but we'll do the best we can. And you know, if I want to do what's right, and I think you'll remember when I was first elected Commissioner of Agriculture in 2011, I took office in January 2012, we had to make some tough decisions and do some things there. And I try to do what I think is right, and I'll do the same on the Oversight Committee. But again, I'm not standing here as a partisan. I'm standing here as an objective member of Congress. I don't see anything that Donald Trump's done that's impeachable. Now, he may offend some people, and he may tweet some things that I wouldn't have tweeted myself, but you can't impeach someone just because you don't like them. And I know that we spent a lot of time investigating Russia collusion. there was nothing there. I mean, the Mueller report was a dud. Mueller then testified, and that was a dud. And now we're on this Ukrainian phone call, and the transcripts are there, and I don't think there was any quid pro quo. I don't think there's been anything that would rise anywhere near the level of an impeachment. So I wanted to mention that. Now we're going to move forward and talk about real things that I think affect everyone in this room. The three committees where I'm a member are as I mentioned, the Oversight Committee, the Agriculture Committee, and the Education Committee. In the Oversight and Education, I'm one of what's called a ranking Republican. So there are 5 subcommittees in each of those committees, and if you're in the majority, like the Democrats are, you're the chairman. You have a chairman of those subcommittees. If you're the top Republican, you're called a ranking member. So I'm the ranking member of a subcommittee on education and a subcommittee on oversight. But on the education subcommittee, we've done a lot of things that I think will have a positive impact on every county in this room, especially the rural counties. I'm the sponsor of what's called the Older Americans Act, and that's a piece of legislation like the Farm Bill was last year that comes around every 5 years. And what that does is it provides the federal funding for your senior citizen centers and a lot of programs like Meals on Wheels that are very popular in every county in Kentucky. And you know, in a time of budgetary constraints, there's always a push to cut programs that some people may deem unnecessary or wasteful. And I'm certainly for cutting a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse out of the federal government. But the senior citizen centers, the Meals on Wheels programs, these are very popular programs across the state. And we worked on legislation too to try to recognize the fact that because of the opioid problem, we have a lot of grandparents that are now raising their children. I know I've had people in area development districts come to our office in Washington and say, you know, the percentages in different area development districts are as high as between 20 and 28% of the school kids in the public schools in these various area development districts are being raised by their grandparents. But a lot of the federal laws don't recognize grandparents as foster parents. And a lot of grandparents, you know, they did everything right. They worked hard, they paid taxes, they paid into Social Security, then they get Social Security age, and you know, it's tough to make ends meet. And then because they have a child that has an abuse issue with drugs, they end up with their children. And they can't afford to raise those children. So we've tried to change the rules to where grandparents, in the future, grandparents will be treated like foster parents that have assistance to be able to raise these children, because we want the children to stay with the families. You know, I think most people in this room would agree that one of the biggest problems we have in America is a breakdown of the family. And one of the biggest problems we have in Kentucky is the opioid epidemic and the drug abuse issues. We have so many parents that are in rehab centers or in prison for drug abuse, and somebody has to raise their children. We want that to be a family member. But too many times, grandparents just can't afford to raise that child off Social Security. So that's something that I've worked very hard on in a bipartisan way with my Democrat counterpart on the committee, Congresswoman Bonamucci from Oregon, and we're doing everything we can to try to recognize that because of the opioid epidemic, the consequences are we have a lot of grandparents now that are having to go back and be the parent again for those children, and they just can't afford it. So the Older Americans Act is a piece of legislation that I work very hard on. I try to focus every year. This is my 3rd year in Congress on a bill, one major bill that can pass. A lot of members of Congress and a lot of state legislators in Frankfort, they file bills knowing they're never going to pass. But we try to get something passed. The Farm Bill was a big win 2 years ago. We have a challenging time in our farm economy. I'll talk about that in just a second. But the Older Americans Act is the legislation that I've worked on this year, and I'm real pleased that it's going to pass the House, it's going to pass the Senate, and President Trump's going to sign it into law. But there are a lot of changes in this Older Americans Act compared to the last one. Increased funding for senior citizen centers, increased funding for Meals on Wheels, significantly more funding for summer school nutritional programs. We have a lot of children that are hungry and through no fault of their own. It's not the children's fault. And we know that if children are going to learn, they can't learn on an empty stomach. And a lot of children get their meals when school's in session. When school's not in session on the weekends or during the summer, it's a challenge for a lot of the kids. So all of this is being addressed in the Older Americans Act, and I think you'll be very satisfied with how that's going to turn out. The funding goes through the area development districts. I've worked with all the area development districts. I have to brag on the area development districts. I have 6 area development districts in my congressional district. Most of you know how the 1st congressional district is shaped. You know, there's a term they call it anytime the reporters write about it, they say that gerrymandered district, you know, gerrymandered. I tell people it's gerrymandered, but it's gerrymandered in a beautiful way. I love the way the lines are drawn. Just keep me out of Louisville and northern Kentucky and we'll be all right. I've been there and don't want to go back. But I love Louisville. Yeah, I fly out of the airport, and we're flying out of the Cincinnati airport here in a minute. But I don't want to be on the ballot up there is what I mean. I don't want to be on the ballot up there. There you go. Boone County. I have bad dreams about Boone County, Judge, but you know. But you're doing a good job, and I'm proud of the leadership position you have on the national level with KCO. And I love my friend the Martins that are here from Boone County, the circuit clerk and PVA. And I also want to recognize my wife is here with me today, somewhere in the back. TJ, she's here. This is the greatest place to come to see all the local elected officials. I said, we've got to come here and say hi to everyone, and I'm glad we're here. So I mentioned the Older Americans Act, another piece of legislation that we worked very hard on 2 years ago was the Farm Bill. I'm not going to rehash that, but agriculture is the biggest industry in the 1st Congressional District. It's one of the biggest industries in America. We have a challenging time in agriculture today. The farmers, unfortunately, are on the front lines of the trade war, which brings me to the next subject I wanted to talk about. Where are we with the trade war? And I'm standing before you today to say that not a lot's happened in movement between the United States and China. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. We had no choice but to embark upon this trade war. We have surrendered so many manufacturing jobs to China. It was a trend that, you know, if we didn't do something to try to stop it, there wasn't going to be a whole lot of manufacturing left in America. And the places where manufacturing is hardest to happen in the United States is in rural areas. And we had manufacturing before NAFTA. You all remember before NAFTA. Every little community, I drive through the communities all the time, not just in my congressional district, but all 6 of the congressional districts. And you see empty factory buildings where you had these factories, and NAFTA happened and it changed the way that manufacturing happened, that manufacturing would move in the future. Well, we capitalized on that eventually. You know, there were a lot of industries that benefited from NAFTA. Agriculture was one. And we started bringing those manufacturing jobs back. And then China starts, you know, significantly growing their economy and significantly doing things that weren't fair, to manipulate their currency, to steal our patents and intellectual property. They did a practice that's called dumping on the foreign markets, which put American manufacturers out of business and forced companies like Apple and forced so many of the garment companies and other big manufacturers, some of the automotive parts manufacturers, to have to go to China to compete. And I think we can compete with China in America on a level playing field. But the playing field is not level. It has to be leveled, and that's what the president's trying to do, and I think he's doing a good job. No one said it was going to be easy, and it's certainly not easy, but the president is standing with the American workers. He's standing with the rural communities that have struggled to retain what manufacturing they have and struggle to attract new good-paying manufacturing jobs because we're competing against China. So I feel like eventually this trade war is going to be won, and it'll be won by not saying, China, you have to buy so many tons of soybeans from us if we buy so many widgets from you. That's not what we're asking for. What we're asking for is, China, you don't manipulate your currency anymore, which means if they need the dollar to be strong, they make their currency weak. If they need the dollar to be weak, they make their currency strong. And it has a huge impact on exporting and importing. And the other thing is, they steal our patents. So if you've got an iPhone, you know, Apple is domiciled in the United States. I'm just using this as an example. They spend a lot of money, like most big corporations in America, spend a lot of their budget on research and development, trying to invent the next thing or be more competitive in how they manufacture something. Chinese companies don't do that. They just sit back and wait till Apple comes up with an iPhone, and then they get it and they take it apart and say, oh, okay, I see how you did that. We're going to start making these. And we didn't spend anything on research and development. We didn't have to pay any engineers. We didn't have to buy any patents. We didn't have to do anything like that, do all the testing. But we can make this a lot cheaper than Apple can. So they'll call Apple and they'll say, if you don't make these in China, we're going to make them ourselves. And we're going to make it Apple with 3 P's in it. So it's not the same apple, but it's essentially the same apple. And that's what they've been doing in manufacturing. And there's no body like the World Trade Organization that governs, that's like a referee that can throw a flag and say, wait a minute, you're cheating, China. That's what we're trying to do, to keep them from cheating with their currency manipulation and with their dumping. And when that happens, I think we can have a renaissance in manufacturing. And if we want to revitalize and rebuild the rural communities in Kentucky, the only way to do it is through manufacturing, good paying manufacturing jobs. So I think that this is a necessary evil, this trade war. We're in agreement with every other country in the world except China. And one of the things that I'm disappointed in Congress is the fact that we haven't voted on the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. That's something that I'm a part of the whip team that's trying to meet with Democrat members to try to get their support to pass the USMCA. That's the new NAFTA. That's the new deal with Mexico and Canada that the president negotiated. And Mexico and Canada are on board, but it has to be ratified by Congress. The votes are there in Congress to pass the bill, but Pelosi thus far has refused to put it on the floor for a vote, simply because, in my opinion, she doesn't want to give Trump a win. And I think that once the USMCA is ratified in Congress, I think we'll have momentum moving forward with China. But I think China's sitting back saying, well, you know, why should we give into this deal with United States when they can't ratify the deal with Mexico and Canada, their 2 main trading partners, and, oh, by the way, he's under impeachment, you know? So it's really unfortunate. There are consequences to legislative actions. We call them, a lot of times, unintended consequences. I don't know if this is unintended or not. I'm going to assume it's unintended, but it's really dragging this trade war on a little longer. So I tell the farmers, I speak to a lot of farm groups, and I say, you know, we're in this for another year. This is an intermediate, this isn't a short-term war. This is an intermediate-term war. This is going to be another year, and we need to brace for it and prepare for it. So I think our farmers and the ag commodity groups are doing that. I want to conclude by, again, thanking you for giving me the opportunity, those in the 35 counties in the 1st Congressional District, for giving me the opportunity to be your representative. I go to Washington every week. I'm really starting to comprehend the process. You know, I was in Frankfort for 15 years. I was a state rep for 11 years and ag commissioner for 4. And everything's different with Washington and Frankfort. You know, Frankfort wasn't that partisan. I know it's an election year and everybody's, throwing jabs and negative TV ads and all that, but at the end of the day, the Republicans and Democrats could sit down together in Washington and work it out. And at the end of the day, the Democrats and Republicans in Washington, in Frankfort rather, the Democrats in Frankfort could sit down and work it out. And at the end of the day, in Frankfort, the Democrats and Republicans sincerely wanted to work it out. But we've got a situation in Washington where the two sides don't even want to sit down and negotiate. That's why I talk about the Older Americans Act. That's why I talk about the Farm Bill, because those were bills that were bipartisan. But because you have a 24-hour news cycle, because you have MSNBC and CNN and Fox News there all the time covering things, they reward bad behavior with more TV time, and it creates a toxic environment. But I do think that there are ways around it. If you have members of Congress that are sincere and actually want to accomplish something, and that's in closing, I want you to know I'm trying to accomplish something, because I know there are a lot of things that we need in Kentucky that we're dependent on the federal government for. Funding for programs like the Meals on Wheels, funding for programs like our school lunch program, funding for different parts of our public education system. We need funding for more infrastructure, and something that I'm very, very strongly in support of. I've worked with Secretary Elaine Chao, and I've talked to President Trump several times on what an infrastructure bill needs to look like and how we can obtain funding for an infrastructure bill. So these are the things that I want to try to get accomplished in Washington, but I just thank you for giving me the opportunity to be your voice in Washington. And again, a lot of friends in this room. Don't ever hesitate to give us a call if there's anything that I can do for you or your counties. Thank you again for the invitation to come back to KCO, and I hope you have a great conference. Thank you all.